Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I want to welcome everybody to today's training. It's interesting, unique, but we all need it. How to increase your compliance training completions. There's a lot that goes into this. We could talk about just, getting the rates of completions up to zero by the end of the month, or a little bit of a trickle over to the next month, which is, creates a lot of stress and anxiety in the world. It doesn't have to be that way at all. We can strategize our program, our culture, to really help us along the way. And there's a lot of integral parts that go into that. So, as far as my background goes, I've been in financial services my whole career. I started working for a regulator where I helped examiners perform their job, to working in large institutions like JP Morgan, UBS, so on, where I led the compliance training function at a global level. So during my career, I've seen a lot. I don't want to say I've seen it all, because there are always items that surprise me. So what we're going to go over today are a number of different features. One, we'll talk about, why we're here, what we're going to get out of it. But I want to delve into common pitfalls that we all see. Some actually we might not see, depending on, your organization and your culture. We'll talk about building a culture of compliance. Now that can be embedded through your training program, which we'll discuss in detail. But we need to get we have to have methods for increasing completions along the way and throughout the year. So you'll see how this kind of factors in and works together. Then we'll talk into probably the most important aspect, your compliance training program. What are the steps to get there? How do we do it? What we should do? And all the other how, what, when, where, and everything else we'll talk about. And if you're going to do compliance training properly, one of the key ingredients is knowing your audience. If you know your audience, you could direct the content appropriately. You could have those right case studies in there that get people thinking and understanding, how does this relate to my job? And then, as always, we have to measure the effectiveness of what we do. That's an ongoing thing that we really can't put aside. So let's first get the basics out of the way. Everybody loves compliance training, right? You ask people in the room to raise up their hands, how many do you think you get? Now, I don't want to say it based on percentages, but it's usually a high percentage of people that would rather not take compliance training. Regardless of that fact, people need to take it. We all have requirements, whether annual, biannual, by regulators or by the board, that we have to achieve. So it's not a recommended or optional thing. It is mandatory. But we don't want to use that mandatory word, which I'll explain a little bit later on. Now, the next point, I'm going to implore you, go beyond tick the box. Now, let me explain, and I'll go into detail about this a little bit later. Listen, there's a portion of our training program that is ultimately tick the box. Those e-learning trainings that you take every year with the same contact. Another word I don't like to use, but they are. It's called refreshers, right? It's a negative connotation on a title and kind of defeats the purpose or hurts the audience before they get there. So we'll go into that a little bit detail. But this all resides around your training program. How it's built, what do you factor in, who is involved? That's a key point. And how are you going to make it work and fulfill all the requirements before the end of the year? Now, with compliance culture, you could kind of tell the compliance culture of the organization. You could look at infractions, enforcement actions, and all of that. But what you really have to look at, what's the mood? What's the motivation of the staff? Is it a lazy, unmotivated environment? Well, if that's the case, you're going to have more risk. Less people will be doing what they need to, or they might not be fulfilling their requests how they should. So a lot of things trickle down into your compliance program that you need to watch and listen for. The next point, relationships. Having the right relationships in your organization will help you tremendously with achieving, maximum completion in shorter time periods. Now, what I used to do in my roles is I would have a point of contact in every single business line. Now, in my part, I dealt with compliance officers. If you're not running a compliance training program, you still need to have points of contact. But compliance officers usually have the best relationship with the business. They know the individuals pretty well to very well, and they can help you with your completions down the road. And we'll talk about that too. Communication plans, we all need them. It's if you don't have a plan, you're destined to fail. So if you don't have a plan that's set up, regardless if it's awareness messages going out through the course of the year, or is it your campaign for that particular training that you want to launch, in the near future, you have to have the necessary components. The little bit more work you do, you'll see more beneficial it is for the audience. Now, are there pitfalls in compliance training? Well, we wouldn't probably have this slide if there weren't. There are a number of pitfalls, and we'll go through a bunch of them, and you might experience your own. If there are any on my list or if there are any that are not on my list, put them in the chat. I would love to hear from you. The typical one is lack of leadership support. You can just say right there that your culture of compliance is probably not that great if you're not getting buy-in from up top. Can you change it? Yeah, you can absolutely change the mentality of staff and get more buy-in for your program, as long as you tell them what's in it for them. What could it achieve? What could it do? Believe it or not, anytime I talk to a business head or a senior management, I always have my little toolkit of like either quotes or substance that I can get their buy-in. It ain't easy, but if you show the return on your investment and, for example, what it could do to the risks in your environment, you could definitely get ahead. Now, not promoting your training efficiently. Well, my people might not know that it's coming. You have to be aware that, you have to give everybody a heads up, whether they need to allocate time for the training or, it's a simple thing like the titles, which I mentioned before, little things like that to get yourself out there ahead of the game, will make people aware that, what, I got to schedule an hour to do my compliance training on this day and this time. Lack of a structured training plan. Well, this is going to make it very difficult. All training plans have to be structured. It's not a regulatory thing. It's just if you want to do the right thing, I guess. But you need a very well-oiled machine that's running properly that everybody knows about. Your communication with the company, whether it's through compliance officers, senior management, they should know what's coming, and it should be structured in a certain way. The next point is pretty obvious as the other three. No follow-up plan. Well, we rolled it out, but we're not going to chase them up. We don't have time. It's not important, or there's just no plan in general. Like I said, being organized, being efficient with your time, and saving from the stress and anxiety of following up constantly, you got to factor that in appropriately. Now, the next set, poor collaboration with key stakeholders. Relationships are key. And I'll tell you that even more so than any other type of training, because again, not everybody wants to do compliance training. I know I can't get that through my bald head, but it's true. And, people have to allocate time and, they want to be inclusive or make sure the content is pertinent. When you have good relationships with your key stakeholders or anybody involved, they sometimes want to get involved. They might want to write content. They might want to do an in-person training. Who knows? but also to get buy-in. If you're going to spend X number of dollars for an e-learning training, you might have to get that approved. Now, what's your business case? Especially if you have poor relationships with people in your organization. The next two go all to your learning management system. If you don't have solid reporting or tracking features in your LMS, it might be time to look for a new one. There's many out there. The reporting, for instance, you think about it, how many reports do you really need? You have the general one. Who did it? Who didn't? Very simple. If you're doing quizzes, you might need a report with their score or whether they did the actual quiz at the end. These are simple reports that you don't have to go too much in detail in. The facts are there. Ineffective automated communication system. Well, the thing is, if you have that, who's reminding staff during the period of that month when it's due? Now, listen, the number of days due, you guys can figure out on your own based on your staff, where they're located, and so on. But remember this, most people complete their training in the first week and the last week. So if you go to 30, 60, 90 days, you'll see that stat regardless. So just something to keep in mind if somebody says, well, 30 days is too soon. Well, you have the ammunition to really get over that hurdle. More pitfalls, overloading content. It's important that people actually learn the content and apply it. If you're putting too much in there, people are going to start glancing over it. They're not going to be reading it. And the content that you want to get across is not going to work. So you spent a lot of time, energy, and effort to get to a point where people aren't really looking over all your material because it's too much. The next one, outdated training materials. I remember when I joined a new organization, I think it was about a year or two ago, where I saw a previous AML act on there, or a former regulation that should have been updated. I didn't see it. Now, credibility wise, you want to keep it when you're running compliance training or you're in that function, because once you lose that credibility in compliance training, it is so hard to get back because everybody wants an excuse not to take it. Now, the next one size fits all. It doesn't. No, that's called tick the box. If I roll out one training to the whole firm and I wish them goodbye and good luck, what does that really do for your culture, for, people actually learning? The whole point of compliance training is minimize risk through education or awareness messages. If you're not doing that, then you're doing a one size fits all. Customize the content. Don't do e-learning all the time. Do some in-person training where people can actually hear other people's questions. So they learn from not only the instructor, but other people in the room. Lack of real world examples, case studies. Again, it goes to credibility with your content. You want to make things applicable to what's going on today. You can't do it real time because, it takes time to build a e-learning module, roll it out. You're probably looking 4 months. But it's not hard to find pertinent real life examples and case studies that people will think about. You have to think of, how do people learn and retain information? It's a little less in compliance training, I will tell you that. But you really understand and take that information into account when you're planning your program out for the year. Sophie, you want to do the first poll? All right, well, we'll move on a little bit more. Oh, there we go. Wow, that's really interesting. You know, I don't think I've ever been in a training where nobody said it was good. Well, I have good news for you though. We can fix it, or we can help get a better way there. Listen, compliance training is not the be all end all. We're not doctors, right? We provide critical information to the masses. So again, we can mitigate risks any way we can. Um, the slides are off, Sophie. All right. So going back to what I mentioned before, with the pitfalls, again, here's just three more. No ongoing reinforcement or refreshers. Basically, if you're not doing your job and you don't have a plan, whether it's automated emails plus sending out excerpts from your report to your points of contact, you have to have that. So in my experience, I did a little everything. One, I would set up the training the best way I could for the organization and make it, as customized as I could. I would make sure that I had, you know, a process by not just the automated emails, but looping in the compliance officers or the business heads. A lot of business heads do get the report of non-completers, and they don't want to be on that list, especially if they have the highest number. So there's a lot of persuasive arguments you can make to a compliance officer to help you out. The next one, if you ignore employee feedback, for example, your case studies need to be revamped, you should try including this information. You got to think, like, what are you doing to make improvements? If you're looking at a strong compliance culture, you got to take into account what employees submit. It might not be anything, but also you want to respond to them. Great idea. Thank you so much. I'll try to have this included in the next round. This is all part of your relationship management and building more credibility to the compliance training function. Now, the last one is, we all deal with technical headaches all the time, but can you prepare for them? Yeah, you can. I used to send an awareness message with tips and tricks if you're having IT related issue, whether it's user experience, well, that's a little different, but accessibility. I wanted to get everything out of the way and make sure people are equipped to be self-sufficient. Doesn't happen all the time, unfortunately, and probably never will. But, getting part of the way there, those incremental baby steps will help you tremendously, because building out a compliance culture that takes into account your risk and all the other elements is key. And that again feeds into the compliance training program that we will talk about soon, and I'm very excited about that. So building a compliance culture, how can you have an impact on changing the culture of your organization? It's a risk mindset. You have to put your compliance hat on, figure out what you're looking to achieve. It's like a mission statement. With my program in 2025, I am hoping to achieve a better compliance culture, a reduction of risk, less issues with audit, examination, so on and so forth. Now, to get senior management buy-in, it's not as hard as you think when it comes to not asking for funds. It's not that hard. But there are opportunities to ask for funds once you build credibility with senior management and they buy in. You want that tone from the top. You want those messages coming out from senior management to be on board. You want them to get involved. Once in a while, if I'm having an in-person training, I'll invite a senior manager to speak, especially if there's 50 to 100 people. Or, on e-learning training, I'll ask one of the senior managers to record a video for the homepage, a little bit of a welcome. These incremental steps help you build more credibility with senior management. But ultimately, you have to tell them what's in it for them. By doing this program and potentially costing us X money, what do we get? Well, you have to look at your ammunition. Have you had an enforcement action? Are you having regulatory inquiries? Are there legal issues? Is the audit log so large and nobody could tackle it or nobody pays attention to it? These are things that help the situation to get better. It's like creating a happy mood. When you walk along the floor of your organization, typically in a poor compliance culture, you'll see people unmotivated, lazy, not doing what they're told. But when you see those smiles start to develop, and I'm not saying this is the be all end all, it's contagious throughout the organization. You're setting a structure for everybody to operate within. And that's what really starts changing the direction of your compliance culture. Amongst other things is create a sense of urgency among staff. I used to send out awareness message or enforce awareness messages that contain, issues or red flags to look for, or, other industry participants or our competitors who had an enforcement action. You create that sense of urgency to the staff. They're going to know a little bit more what to look for, what to do, and they'll be more educated and possibly, help with that risk mitigation effort. Now, if you do training, whether it's in person or whether it's e-learning, doesn't matter. You have to give people the information they need to be equipped to do their job. If somebody's, for example, if I'm doing a team training for 15, 20 people in AML and they're all part of the transaction monitoring team, I'm going to talk to them about red flags, what to look out for, investigation steps, escalation points. Now, red flags you could pretty much put in every single training. And if you ever went to, for example, FinCEN has a great site with great education. And on the bottom of most communications, they list red flags. You can leverage them, but my point is that's what you want people taken away, that retention level. It's like understanding how a human mind operates to a point. You don't have to be a psychologist, but you want to be able to get through to them. And then you want to start embedding those values in your training, your communications, whether they're campaigns, one-offs, regardless of what it is. It all goes into building a better compliance culture for your organization. And, believe it or not, I went into one organization that had beyond bad, like really low. And, I made efforts to try to change it. And I subtly created a structure. I created involvement. I had my points of contact that helped me with chasing up training or getting involved in the training. That's where all the buildup comes from, and you could really take advantage of it. So building a compliance culture, it is very important, because think of what would happen if you had a lax, unmotivated, lazy environment. You're going to get infractions from your regulator or senior management. Either one is really not a good look, so we try to stay away from that. Now, the one thing, if you're in a compliance training function, I always look for people who are extensions of me. And because I can't be everywhere, I can't promote my program to every single person in the organization. And that's why I leverage compliance officers. Now, compliance officers, they don't produce any revenue, but they're revenue enablers. They help people say, well, this option's not right. Let's try this. So they should be in the business. Now, I have always trained compliance officers, believe it or not, on soft skills so they could be more effective in dealing with the business, dealing with meetings and all of that such. Because typically compliance officers get slighted. It's one of the necessary things. So I want to equip them with the skills and the motivation, to go back to their business group, conduct better meetings, have better presentations. If you have a structured approach to presentations or your meetings, you can get a lot more done, and you'll be able to ask more, poignant questions about risk. So To me, that's a really big thing because compliance officers, they know the regulations, are hired that way. But it's the soft skills that you could work on that could coincide with building a really solid compliance culture for your organization. You know, these programs I've built at I think every institution I've been a part of, and I usually call it compliance mastery class or something along those lines, where I'll loop in the compliance officers for maybe a 4 hour slot or even an 8 hour slot if it makes sense, and then teach them, get them more confidence, get more structure to their game. I'm not saying that everybody has this, but if you want to create consistent messaging, you want compliance officers to experience their own personal growth, this could be tremendously helpful. And believe it or not, it's accredited now. So this works tremendously. So methods for increasing your training completions. It all starts before launch, the planning phase. Now, you can promote your trainings. You can send out, say your training's coming over the next month. You can send weekly trainings, reminders with, quick stats, quick information, a did you know, to make sure everybody's aware that this training is coming. You can apprise management. And sometimes I even let management take the trainings in advance just to look over the material. That happens sometimes. And if that's it, perfect. As long as I have their involvement. The next one is one of my big pet peeves, using the right title. Now, the word refresher, right off the bat, you lost everybody. It's the same training every year. We're not going to learn anything. It'll probably be the same quiz questions. That's what people think about compliance training. Now, I would never use the word refresher. If, for example, if it was an AML training for this year, I would call it the 2025 AML compliance training. Once you use that refresher, you're going to lose people. And then really getting retention of the information is going to be so much more difficult. Get people excited. I'm not talking about putting on pom-poms, running around the floor and get people excited, but go to team meetings, explain, you have a new program now, new trainings, and tell them the insights about it. Some people look at this as really helpful information and want to be part of it. You can't get everybody excited about compliance training. That's pretty difficult. You notify the relevant people. So if I'm going to launch a training next month again, I have a whole list of people that I'm going to give the heads up. Besides senior management, or everybody in my compliance department, potentially legal. This is coming up in 30 days. Just want you to prepare. But the compliance officers have to be kept in a loop if you use them as a point of contact, or whoever your point of contact is. Letting senior management know, business heads. This could be one quick email or a few meetings. I like the meeting route because, it just helps me build a better relationship and get even more credibility. And that's really about it. You want to give people the respect and the heads up about what's coming. And listen, we all get complaints about compliance training. I didn't know about it. I didn't get the email. I didn't, all this stuff. And we get that finger pointing, but that can't sway you from doing what you described in your plan along the way and throughout the year. So this is a little information before launch and a couple of more. Before launch, you want to make sure that you tie the training. Well, let's talk about content. The content has to be relevant, impactful, meaningful, and try to be new or new ways to kind of present the information. Because, this training could actually help people in their roles. But you can't think that way. You have to think that this is going to help people because of the way I crafted it, the way I put it together, and the real life scenarios that I put in there. It all ties together. Now, you could also talk about the duration of the training. And you have to think about, do regulators require a certain duration? No. They look at content, whether you're meeting the needs of your risk assessment and other elements to minimize the risk when you can. So training could be 30 minutes, 20 minutes. It doesn't matter. But again, you don't want to overload the content, and you want to make sure that people remember when they walk away. Clear expectations and deadlines. Everybody should know when it's due. In your initial messages, you could say, I'm giving you 30 days to complete it. It will be due on X date. Please plan it appropriately. And then, as far as consequences of non-completion, I've written policies as far as, what happens to individuals when they don't complete it. And, it depends on your organization. You can slap people on the wrist. You might be able to take a little bit of their bonus or whatever, but you want to make sure that you have that set in stone. And I used to call it consequence management policy. If you don't complete a mandatory training by the due date, you're going to open up more risk for our organization. So that's not a good thing. And definitely leadership buy-in, as we discussed before. During the training, you got to turn your different hat on now. Training's live, it's out there. Now we got to do our job on making sure everybody completes it. Send the automated reminders. I used to do it on a weekly basis, but when it came closer to the deadline, I did it a little bit more frequently. It really depends. For incentivizing people, I put that up there. Should anybody be incentivized for completing something that's manual? Not real manual. Mandatory? Not really. But, you can also come up with silly awards, or, have that person stand out, or a group of people like this team finish the training first in the firm. Great. You could do things like that. Now, with make training interactive, we could do that very easily. If you have your own software or you hire a vendor for e-learning, you can have those conversations on there, interactions between different people. But if you're in an in-person environment, you should not be doing all the talking. You should get everybody involved, share their experiences, what's going on. Let them share something that happened recently. But you should be very interactive where everybody gets involved. You could do exercises or things like that, and these are really helpful. But scenario-based learning is really the best. I mean, listen, we could put quizzes out there, test people's knowledge. That's great, and we should do that on every training. But again, you want to keep their engagement high. Provide support channels. Depending on your firm, you might have your own chat channel. Leverage it, or leverage any other social media platforms that you use internally. This could really help you, especially when you hear, oh, I didn't know about that training, or I didn't know it was due. And that's going to probably happen regardless. Monitor completion rates in real time. I used to have our LMS up all the time, and I just, refresh the screen probably twice, 3 times a day. But I also had it on because people would always check, did I complete it? And it would just save me a lot of hassle. If I had everything in real time in front of me, I could answer that phone call real quick or that email real quick. And this is where, time suck could come in, because if a lot of people are reaching out to you, how are you going to respond? You could take each one as a one-off and try to take care of it, or you could think about a systematic process where people can really access, and you could just send them the link. Again, it's about making your life easier during the training. Now, with after the training, this is where you have the remaining stragglers, and there could be a few, there could be many. I usually go by a percentage basis because all organizations have different number of people, of course. So if you're upwards of like 1 to 5% in that range at the end of the month, it's not terrible, but you obviously have to get to zero. Now, it could be people on vacations or out of the office, and that's all considered, right? And I used to get this email all the time. Well, I'm taking a 1 week vacation after the training's rolling out. And I used to respond, well, the training's 4 weeks. Do you think you could do it in the other 3 weeks? Then I usually used to get a response, yeah, I could do it. So listen, everybody's going to have an excuse, a way to get out of it. They can't. So just trying to make it as easy as possible for them to fulfill the requirements, because it shouldn't be a chore. Now, let's get to the training plan. Oh, before we get there, we have our one question. Okay.
We have a question that says, does it make sense to implement this training as a part of the onboarding? Is that too soon?
No, it isn't. You should have a very consistent routine, regardless if it's new hires, existing staff, or even contractors. Don't forget about the contractors or consultants. Sometimes they do the job of a real full-time employee. So you have to consider them too, because there is a risk with having people who haven't been trained on any of your information or tools. So be really careful about that. Also, I got a question. Is there a format you've seen work best for notifications? Simple, straightforward. For example, you're overdue, or you have to complete the training it is, and the link. And then you could also add language, what will happen if you don't do it. The format itself, listen, like a lot of this format is derived by our learning management systems, and it's hard to alter them, but it's the information you put in there that should be very simple, very straightforward, where people don't really have to think. You want to make things easier up front, because if not, it's going to cost you time down the road. And these are things you can get out of the way quick. Good question, though. Really good question so far. All right. So my favorite part, well, everything's my favorite, but conducting a thorough needs analysis. So we're kind of at the point where your plan should be finalized or pretty close to finalized, but that doesn't even matter, because your training program or plan is a living document. It will never be the same it is at the beginning of the year than it is at the end of the year. You're always going to have to make adjustments based on new regulations. Maybe there's new product services in your organization, and so on. So we have to think of it as a living document. So what are my 4 steps for doing a training needs analysis? 1, you got to set the foundation. What are the goals? What are the objectives of my organization? I have to meet with senior management, get an idea. The chief compliance officer, get his or her thoughts. Meet with the compliance officers, and also meet with the business heads initially, because I want to pull that all out of them when I'm trying to get the foundational level set. Because then I know which confines I'm operating within for the year. Now, with the collecting data, this is really important. There is a lot of data out there that you can access. And I'm just going to go through it real quick. 1, audit. Great source. Listen, if you have aged items on there over 100, 200 days, there's something wrong, most likely. But, audit findings, what's open, what's closed over the last couple of years. Examinations, of course. If you go through an annual examination, you should look through the last 2 or 3 years and get an idea of what's going on. Are there any consistencies, trends, themes? You got to find that out. Any legal issues that are creating more risk throughout the organization. Maybe you're sued or fined or something like that. HR. Now, this is interesting. People always ask me about this. Why do I have HR on here? Well, I'll tell you. Now, as far as the compliance culture goes, what happens if you're having really high rates of turnover? Meaning, the average employee stays here 7, 8 months, maybe a year. Think of the risk. Think about the information passing from the old employee to the new employee. I want to know, like, what kind of risk does HR see? That is really big to me. And then look at the last couple of years' training plans if you have them. Now, this is just the basis. Your discussions with compliance officers of the business should be documented and put into one document. I usually do. So that's about collecting all the data. Next, you're going to analyze the data. I know I'm telling you steps you probably know already, but you're going to look through every single item. And this isn't as time consuming as you think. If I look at an examination and there were 7 points pulled out by our regulators, do all of those 7 points necessitate training? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe 5 of the 7 necessitate training, and one of them is an awareness message. So what I do is I start listing out all the data, all the issues on a spreadsheet. I know I'm old school, but this is how I love to do it, because I set up my spreadsheet like a plan, and I start entering in information that's concerning to me. On an audit log, there's issues with, again, I'll use transaction monitoring, coming up with too many false positives, meaning things that shouldn't be seen. Is there training required for the transaction monitoring team? That's how I do each one item by item. I put in there based on the documents I'm reviewing. And I also take into account, what did the business head say? Where are areas where they can't sleep at night and seeing problems? I will list those on there too. And I will talk to the compliance officer and list those out. So once I get all that information in a spreadsheet or what looks like the beginning of a plan, then I will talk to everybody again and I'll start putting the plan together. So for example, if personal account dealing was a major risk and it's on there, I'll tell that particular compliance officer, this came up on the risk assessment. Oh yeah, add risk assessment to collecting data. I almost forgot. That's the most important part. But you need to show where it came from and what are you trying to accomplish by this topic. If it's, counterterrorism or something like that, where did you get that topic from? Because you're going to be asked. So I create a column that says source. So essentially, if you're looking from left to right, you see topic, relevant areas it's going to hit, the time of the year proposed, the medium, how you're going to deliver it. Now, I wouldn't decide on that quite yet, and everybody has their interpretation. You, as leading a compliance training function, have to figure out what is the best fit for delivery of this training. And, you have to provide your recommendations, and sometimes strongly. If somebody says, listen, I just want to do e-learning, get it over with. And, I would come back and say, what's that going to do? It's not going to do anything. It's not going to educate anybody. Let's go about it this way. So when you're building out your training plan, you know it better than anybody. And when you're ready to have those conversations to get approval for those particular topics, it will be a lot easier said than done. And then you have your compliance training program. You go through the approval process. You should be explaining this at working group committees, senior management meetings. If your compliance department has a weekly meeting as well, you want to get everybody on board and make sure there isn't anything you left at the last moment. Remember, the plan itself is live. It's living. You could always make adjustments down the road. If you know of a new regulation coming out in 5 months, you could put a placeholder there. Listen, that regulation might not come forward, or it may not, or it may so. You could always remove it. And also, don't delete anything, archive it. Remember, record keeping. You want to make sure that all your records are intact, and if something happens to you, somebody else could take over. Now, going beyond tick the box, again, it does have its place. It does, if used correctly, but it's about minimizing risk. If you're just going to send a quick training out, 5 minutes, and just have everybody go through it, you got to think about, what are you accomplishing for your job? This is what senior management wants. Well, you have to have those conversations with senior management and show them the impact of not only what you're doing, but what you want to do. They want to see that out of the day. If it's not a disruption, it's an easy fix, or they're not going to mind it. But you have to go to battle sometimes with your plan. Now, with a training plan, you should be conquering all risks within your organization. Every single one should be accounted for, and the people who will attend that training as well. So if you're addressing every single risk, you're going to meet the regulatory requirements. I almost guarantee it. I mean, there might be one thing in there that's an addition later on, but you will complete it. Now, I mentioned earlier about new hires, contractors, consultants. Yeah, these aren't existing employees right now, but they could be, and new hires obviously will be. So you got to set the stages about your compliance culture on that day. So when you meet with new hires, it's another way to change the landscape. I used to put a presentation together and speak to new hires every week. And it was about the vision that I got approved from management that I wanted to convey to every new person that walked through that door. That's a big thing. You're going to target existing staff, but you want to get the new people when they come aboard. So if you do have a weekly, monthly presentation, be a part of it. If you're running the compliance training function in some capacity, you want to talk to those new hires. For consultants, contractors, any temporary staff, they need training. Now, if they're there for only a month, 2 months, you might have an internal policy that anyone over 90 days participates. Your call, but you got to think, some of them are doing the same job as somebody who's out, or they're a temporary fix. That's risk there we need to focus on. Now, I'm just going to skip that cut. So with your training program now, everything should be laid out, possibly in quarters during the course of the year. And, you really have a good grasp of your needs analysis and know what to be done. Now, taking a balanced approach. Again, it's like not doing e-learning all the time. Do some in-person training, do some awareness messages, mix it up. In-person trainings are a lot easier than rolling out e-learning. It's a lot quicker time, and you get the biggest bang for your buck. You're going to have to choose the method of delivery for every training you're going to deliver this year. This is where you're going to make your recommendations and you're going to get buy-in. Very important. You want to ensure that you have coverage across the entire organization. Every single person is going to attend training at least a couple of times. Creating efficiency, this is my favorite part. This is when you're all done with the plan, you get it approved. Now, you might see 2 line items with the same training topic, say front office and back office. Why not get them into a room so they could hear from one another? Understand the flow, what each does, so on and so forth. It will help you tremendously. And then, of course, keeping everybody in the loop. Just going to skip there. For performance measurements, you need to measure the performance of everything you do. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. One is the quiz. That's easy. Just learning, testing their knowledge. Did they pass 7 or 8 out of 10, whatever requirement you have? That's easy. Now, behavior is the hard one, and this could be done. Now, for example, say a department sponsors a particular training and it's all new material. How are you going to gauge whether it actually took? Well, you speak to managers, you look at exception reporting. Are they creating the same errors they did before? If not, you got a winner, but you still have to do refresher, I know the word, down the road. The reaction is these are those happy sheets that we pass out at the end of the session. It's really like, how did the instructor perform? How did the materials look? You can get something out of that, but you won't get everything. Now, I can't say to do all three of these, behavior, learning, and reaction at the same time. It might not have a place. One of the three might suffice, or two, but you got to leave it up to your discretion. All right, Sophie, with that being said, I am ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Justin. I feel like I've learned so much in the past hour. I've got lots to take away. I've got so many new ideas after everything you said. We do have one question in the Q&A box at the moment. If anyone has anything else they want to ask Justin, please feel free to pop it in there.
Have you ever tried to implement compliance training program in an organization with a distinctive open source culture, low levels of hierarchy, and aversion towards strict policy? I mentioned an example earlier today that fits it to a T right there. You can't make huge inroads. But I told Sophie this quote earlier. Don't try to change the world until you know what's in it. Wait, monitor, take your baby steps forward. It's not going to happen in a day, regardless of the environment. But you can't force feed them, because that's going to come back very negatively on you. Good question.
Any other questions?
Does it make sense to implement this training as part of an onboarding? What I always did was, anytime I created a training, I usually roll it out to existing staff first, and then it would go to new hires, especially if it's an annual training. I would just replace it and go on from there. But you want to have them synced up. You don't want existing staff learning too much differently than new hires.
Yeah.
I think I got the other two questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin. If no other questions are going to come in, we could wrap up there. But thank you everyone for attending. All attendees will get a recording link after this session, so you can catch up whenever you want. There will also be kind of a wrap-up article with key takeaways too. Make sure to connect with Justin on LinkedIn as well. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you.